What is up, mixtapers? Welcome to My Weekly Mixtape, the show that takes the classic mixtape approach to building a modern playlist. I'm your host, Brian Colburn. Since the start of Season 2, I've been using an online randomizer that is filled with all of your suggestions for episode ideas. I've been spinning that and letting that answer determine where I will go for the remainder of the episode. But for this week, I had a topic earmarked and I need to run with it. It's one that's very special and important to me because without this topic, there would be no Brian Colburn. There would be no My Weekly Mixtape. My love of music wouldn't be there. And this playlist is dedicated to the person who truly helped shape my love of music. And that is my father, who we sadly lost earlier this year to pancreatic cancer. But knowing him and knowing the person he was, he would not want me to be sitting here for an hour recording this episode with a somber tone. He would want me to be rocking out and celebrating all of the great memories and times that we had in my first 47 years on this earth. So what I want to do for him this week is put together a playlist based on Friday night music nights. Now, for those of you that have not heard me talk about this on the show before, Friday night music nights was the night of the week where my dad would get home from work, and instead of sitting down on the couch and putting on Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune or some war movies, which, you know, as a kid, I really wasn't a fan of, he would take the dust cover off the turntable, open up the record cabinet, and start pulling out records. And as the night went on, it would get louder and louder and louder. And I was allowed to stay up much later than any other night of the week. It was my favorite night of the week because I was allowed to dance around the living room like a maniac as long as I didn't make the record skip. You had to be very careful about that. But sing my lungs out and just enjoy every moment of it. And some of my favorite childhood memories come from those Friday night music nights. Now, normally these randomized episodes that I've been doing, all thanks to you, the fellow mixtapers, have been 10 songs. But I feel like there's no way I could do a 10-song playlist for my father and for Friday night music nights any sort of justice, because just looking at the playlist here on my phone, there's well over 400 songs. So to whittle that down is just, it's an impossible task. And to be frank with you guys, not even worth trying to whittle down to 10. So in his honor tonight, I will be doing 20 songs, which I still feel is a major disservice, but I don't want this episode to be 16 hours long because I could easily do it. That's how many songs there are in this playlist, and I can talk about each and every one of them at length. But I do want to say before I start diving into these songs, I thank each and every one of you listeners and mixtapers for sending in these amazing topics and upcoming show ideas. You've heard the last month of shows when I've been randomly picking these topics and turning them into playlists. Please keep them coming. Send me in your playlist ideas, myweeklymixtape@gmail.com. You can also hit me up on all the social media haunts at myweeklymixtape. If you want to take it a step further, you can join the Mixtaper community over at patreon.com/myweeklymixtape. It's free to join, but there are also some tiers there. If you'd like to support the show a little extra, there's no requirement to do so, and I am extremely grateful for any love and support you show the program. And then finally, you can find the entire backlog of My Weekly Mixtape episodes, as well as all the playlists I've put together, well over 150 in all, at myweeklymixtape.com. Now, no matter where you're listening, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, I would appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button, leave a 5-star review, and share My Weekly Mixtape with the music fans in your life. Now, without further ado, let's dive into a playlist I'm calling Passing Down the Playlist, how my father shaped my love of music through 20 songs. I think the first one is going to be no shock to anyone who's listened to this podcast, so I'm not even going to go into some long story to try to build up any suspense or anticipation. It's the Cars' Good Times Roll, the opening track on their self-titled album, my favorite album of all time. I have spun this album more times than any other album in my life, and this is the one that kicked it off. This song kicked off more Friday night music nights for my parents than I can imagine. Maybe in the mid-'80s it started to change because when Hello Again came out, the opening track on Heartbeat City, that started getting a lot of love too. And a lot of times when my dad would make mixtapes to bring in the car with him, or when we go on road trips, he'd start side A with Good Times Roll and side B with Hello Again, because it's the second side of the tape and he's saying hello again. I think that's pretty self-explanatory there. The Cars are one of those bands that are truly ingrained in my musical DNA, and there's no better way to kick things off than with their contribution for the night. I am going to tell you right now, there will be no doubling up of artists tonight. I am going to have a hard time whittling these songs down to just 20. So sometimes I'm going to have to make tough decisions, meaning an artist is going to get represented, but I'm going to sit here and mull over which track gets represented in the discussion. Now with the Cars, there are so many amazing songs I could pull from, but favorite album of all time, opening track, this one kind of is a no-brainer for me. Good Times Roll to kick things off. And I think to follow that up, we're going to go with another album opening track because, believe it or not, sometimes, and I think this is where my love of album opening tracks comes from. When my dad would pull out albums, sometimes he would just drop the needle on side A, and side A track 1 became like a thing. You got to wait those however many seconds for the song to start. The anticipation would build up and the song would kick in. Depending on the album, it really set the stage for what to expect. And with vinyl, you couldn't just skip to the next one. You'd have to kind of find the groove and the needle if you wanted to start at track 2. So usually album openers got a lot of love on Friday night music nights, including this next one. And it's yet another song that I don't think really needs an introduction, because as a child, at this point, I was 7, 8 years old. And if I heard the words, "Dearly beloved, we're gathered here today to get through this thing called life," I knew I was about to go friggin' crazy. And Prince and the Revolution, Let's Go Crazy, the Purple Rain soundtrack, this was my jam. This was one of my picks of the night, because what my dad basically did is he became the DJ of the night. He would pick a song, then he would ask me to pick a song, then he would ask mom to pick a song, then he would choose a song. We kind of round robin it. Sometimes I would get a little too into let's play Let's Go Crazy again and again and again. So he might take the liberty of swaying me in different directions. And I was only 7 at the time, so my wheelhouse wasn't as expansive as it was now. But this was kind of the way where my love of mixtaping came in, where other people would choose songs and we'd kind of feed off of each other. And I did this with my parents growing up. And I don't think there's really much you need to say about Let's Go Crazy. The song is an absolute masterpiece. Prince is one of the best to ever do it. The guitar solo at the end of this song showed he is, apologies if you're not a wrestling fan, but if you're a Seth Rollins fan, you'll know he is and I have to add a ahem here, revolutionary. He is a visionary, and he is one of the greatest to ever do it. And for 7-year-old Brian, jumping up and down on the couch, the song was kind of giving me my directions. Let's go crazy. Let's get nuts. And that's exactly what I did. So following up the Cars, Good Times Roll, Let's Go Crazy by Prince. And now at this point of the night, my dad would turn it over to my mom. And one of my mom's favorites growing up, it's still one of my mom's favorites, she still loves listening to Pat Benatar, is, I guess it should come as no surprise here, it's another album opener, this time from her Precious Time album, Promises in the Dark. Now, my mom kind of teetered because she could have also went with Shadows of the Night from Get Nervous, and either one I would never argue with because these are my 2 favorite Pat Benatar songs. So this is one of those situations where I had to almost flip a coin. However, one thing about Friday night music nights that usually came into play, not a lot of ballads got played. And the opening to Promises in the Dark is probably the closest thing to a ballad you're going to hear on this playlist tonight. However, Promises in the Dark is anything but a ballad, but the opening just shows the dynamics of the song, where it opens with this slow, beautiful melody and it just turns into an absolute rocker. And coming out of the end of Prince's Let's Go Crazy, I think you kind of need a slight palate cleanser before you keep rocking out again. And I feel like the intro to Promises in the Dark does that. Because if you jump right into Shadows of the Night, I don't know if the mixtape can handle that much energy. I don't know. And I like to have some friggin' dynamics moving through these songs here. So we're going to go with Promises in the Dark. But make no mistake, Shadows of the Night is an absolute banger. And when it comes to videos, Shadows of the Night is my favorite Pat Benatar video. Yes, I know most people want to talk about the dance in Love is a Battlefield, but no. It's fighter jets all the way. But anyway, Promises in the Dark. I had a chance to see Pat Benatar with my parents on several occasions, and she always puts on an amazing show. Her husband, Neil Giraldo, is just a beast on guitar. Fun fact about Neil, on top of all the endless stuff he's done with Pat Benatar, he is also the lead guitarist and bassist on Rick Springfield's Jesse's Girl. So fun random fact as I do a little tangent here as I'm scrolling through this list, trying to come up with track 4 of the night. And I really kind of want to dive away from album openers because I could pretty much do an album opening 20-song list of Friday night music and still make it work. But I don't want to be too obvious here. So I'm going to move away from the album openers in the cleanup spot. Although the album opener on this album, Eliminator, could be a perfect fit here. Give Me All Your Lovin', ZZ Top. Absolute banger of a tune and perfect way to kick off the album. However, as a 7-year-old dancing around, when I heard the opening, The Sharp Dressed Man, I'd walk into my dad's office and grab his sunglasses and his jacket and throw it on, and I would strut around that living room like I was the coolest thing on planet Earth. And they sure as hell made me feel that way. So Sharp Dressed Man is very much a quote-unquote cliched ZZ Top hit. But for me, there's just such a fun memory of feeling like I was on top of the world listening to that song. And every time it comes on now, I kind of want to lower the sunglasses because every girl's crazy about a Sharp Dressed Man. I got to see them with my folks, my wife, and my kids when ZZ Top toured with John Fogerty. And hearing that song, even though we were at the amphitheater, I had my sunglasses sitting on top of my forehead. I turned and looked at my dad and just lowered them onto my head for a second and just kind of gave a little nod. I mean, yeah, this was the one that had to make the playlist tonight. But following it up, yeah, we're going back to album opener. Sorry, it's going to happen. It's another band I got the chance to see live with my father twice. We enjoyed seeing the tour so much with my mom the first time. It came around a second time through the area, and my mom had plans that evening, so my father and I decided that we would go by ourselves. And we got to see both at the Bergen Pack in Englewood, New Jersey, as well as the State Theater in New Brunswick, New Jersey, Huey Lewis and the News on one of their last tours when they were playing Sports in its entirety. And Sports is one of those albums that I felt like almost became a cliche when you went record hunting because it sold 30 gazillion copies. So anytime you go to a record store or go crate digging, you were pretty much guaranteed to find a copy of it. And it's, as far as I'm concerned, a perfect album. As much as I love Picture This and 4, Sports was the album that really sent Huey Lewis through the stratosphere. And the heart of rock and roll, that opening with the heartbeat, I used to sit there and pound on my chest when the song would kick off. And again, it kind of gives you that lull at the end of Sharp Dressed Man to kind of build up and kick back right into the party again. So yeah, Huey Lewis and the News, I was blessed and honored in season 1 to have Bill Gibson from Huey Lewis and the News on the show to build the ultimate Huey Lewis and the News playlist. I highly recommend, if you're a Huey Lewis fan, go back and check that episode out. That was a bucket list show for me because I got to talk about my Friday night music nights and the love I have of these songs with one of the gentlemen responsible for them. And chances are it's probably the only time I'm ever going to talk about the News on my weekly mixtape. And by news, I mean Huey Lewis and not the stuff that we are bombarded with on social media and all of our news apps all day long. But all that being said, Bill Gibson was an absolute bucket list. Pinch Myself, I Must Be Dreaming episode for me, one of the highlights of my weekly mixtapes run, and a no-brainer for one of the songs that helped shape my love of music. Now, I will say this, Huey Lewis and the News, one of those bands, I could have went with countless songs. Just the memory of seeing them live twice on the sports tour, I think is what kind of gave the nod to Heart of Rock and Roll. I could have easily gone with an album cut like Tell Me a Little Lie or The Only One off of Picture This. I could have went with some of their plethora of hits. Yeah, I know that's the movie reference of Three Amigos. Sorry about that. But you've got Do You Believe in Love? You've got The Power of Love, another movie reference, Back to the Future. You've got Jacob's Ladder and Hip to Be Square with a third movie reference if you want to bring up American Psycho. But rising to the top for tonight's specific playlist, it's the Heart of Rock and Roll from Sports. And with that, every now and then my dad would like to pivot the songs. Maybe this sounds familiar to you if you've listened to an episode before. Every now and then I just love to randomly pivot in the middle of a mixtape for no reason whatsoever. Well, now you know where I get it. But I know kind of the stuff you're hearing right now is like an early 80s musical smorgasbord. But that wasn't where he always lived musically, so he did enjoy mixing things up a bit. So it wasn't uncommon for him to dip into the 60s and 70s as we were listening to these albums, but there always had to be a rhyme or reason to it. Even if it was a pivot, it had to make some kind of musical sense, because at the end of the day, spoiler alert, a lot of these Friday night music nights were basically just him recording mixtapes to use on the weekends when we'd go to car shows or go on road trips or go out for vacation or different events. So there was a method to this musical madness. So let's go down that road for a little bit. And one of the songs he liked to dip back into a lot is one of those songs that I like to call the dashboard keyboard song. It's one of those songs that when you're driving, your left hand is on the steering wheel and your right hand is reaching out and attempting to play keyboards on the dashboard, whether you are a keyboard player or not. And this one is one of those ones that I would consider myself a very prolific dashboard keyboard player. I've never attempted to take those dashboard keyboard skills and move them to an actual keyboard, and I'm afraid of what that would sound like. But in my mind, when Johnny Rivers' Rockin' Pneumonia and the Boogie Woogie Flu came on, I was up there with Jerry Lee Lewis in terms of piano skills. This is from his LA Reggae album, although my parents didn't own that. They owned Johnny Rivers' Greatest Hits. I want to say that was done through K-Tel, but don't hold me to that. I'm 99.9% sure. This is one of those albums, though, that this was not a full album listen in my house. It was Rockin' Pneumonia and the Boogie Woogie Flu, and then moving on to the next album. So in time, I actually listened through the album all the way through and enjoy a ton of the stuff on it. However, the one song that immediately brings me to Friday night music nights and one of the songs that shaped where I am musically was Rockin' Pneumonia and the Boogie Woogie Flu. Now, fast forward to the late 80s, the Less Than Zero soundtrack, and Aerosmith doing their slowed down version. This was one of those moments where I was able to kind of pull my dad aside and be like, hey, check this out. Listen to this version. And got to bond with a band that, even though Aerosmith was a band that my dad was very, very, very familiar with, this was Aerosmith mid-80s, where I felt like I was discovering Aerosmith and trying to be hip to what was new in music and sharing it with my parents. And this was one that I was able to share with my father. And anytime I could do that and he dug it was a huge W for me. And I always felt like $1,000,000 when I was able to share a song with him that he enjoyed, because it was like my way of saying thank you for all the songs that he shared with me that I still love to this day. Kind of like a musical love language, so to speak. But enough about Aerosmith for now. We're talking about Johnny Rivers, which his version of Rockin' Pneumonia and the Boogie Woogie Flu is a cover in and of itself because Huey Piano Smith did the original, but I'm not going to dive down that rabbit hole. But yes, Johnny Rivers does bring us out of the 80s a little bit and gives us a little room to branch out. And that's exactly what I'm going to do here with another keyboard-driven anthem. Now, I'm going to say anthem, but I'm not sure this will be an anthem on everyone's specific musical playlists, but let me explain. While this song was indeed a #1 hit, I don't know if maybe the sands of time have maybe washed it off of people's minds, because this is one that when I mention it to people, it almost is a, oh yeah, that type moment. And if anything, it would top a list of underrated songs of all time, in my opinion. But this song holds a special place in my heart for multiple reasons. One is obviously the Friday night music night connection. And the second is this is the first song that I ever talked up on radio back in college when I was interning with another DJ at my college radio station. Her show focused on garage rock of the 60s and 70s. And I got to learn a lot about that era of music through her, and I'm extremely appreciative of that. But more importantly, the first time that I sat down in front of a microphone, turned my mic on, and talked up a song live on the air, it was 96 Tears by Question Mark and the Mysterians. It's garage rock at its finest. To me, they were a pioneering band in what would become garage rock and punk rock. Yes, I know this is the 60s, but there are the origins of what you would hear in the later 70s sound of punk rock coming out in Question Mark and the Mysterians. And there was something about this song that was just so infectious, so raw, and so real. And it has made a lot of greatest songs of all time lists, but it's not one of those songs that a lot of people really talk about as being influential. And to me, it is by a long shot. Now, my parents didn't own a Question Mark and the Mysterians album, but they did own another one of those K-Tel compilations, although this one was not by K-Tel. I want to say it was a Warner release, but it was called Wild Thing. And it was chock full of songs from that era featuring stuff like, obviously, Trog's Wild Thing, Swinging Medallions, Double Shot of My Baby's Love, Louie Louie by the Kingsmen, I Fought the Law by Bobby Fuller 4, Nobody But Me by the Human Beings. There was just a lot of that would become punk sound shining through on this album. My dad played this one a lot, and that's why a lot of that stuff resonates with me. And I feel like it's the reason why I love punk rock so much. Hell, one of my first children's albums, while it was mostly covers of 80s stuff, was Chipmunk Punk. So even as a young child, I was inspired by the word punk. There was something about the punk rock vibe and the atmosphere and the attitude that really resonated with me. And this song is one of those ones that is a highlight of that sound. So there's no way I can talk about the songs that shaped who I am musically without including 96 Tears. But now that I've introduced some of that proto-punk vibe that I'm excited to be able to talk about, I want to bring us closer back to the 80s, but stay in the late 70s with a song that thankfully this band was one of the last bands my father got to see inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2024, that being Foreigner. And I'm going to go with the opening track, big shock there, off their Double Vision album, that being Hot Blooded. One of those reasons why for many, many years people were pounding their fists on the table, wondering why Foreigner wasn't in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They are an incredible rock band. Lou Graham's vocals on this track are just off the charts. Obviously, Mick Jones' guitar work is on another planet. This is a true classic rock song. And I don't mean classic rock in the term of classic rock, the genre. I mean, it is a classic and it is a rock song. I hope that makes sense. This is one of those ones that as a kid, when that guitar riff started, I got up and started stomping around the living room. It's one of those ones that just, well, apologies for this pun, but it gets your blood boiling, gets you up, gets you excited. And as a kid, this is one that I just loved the riff. I was a huge AC/DC fan as a kid. I loved hard rock. And for my parents' era, Foreigner was hard rock, at least on this track. And this is one that I don't think ever skipped a Friday night music night. And to this day, every time it comes on, it gets turned on extra loud. I know a lot of people resonate with Jukebox Hero, and I've got nothing but love for that song. Foreigner 4 is an absolute masterpiece. But when it comes to all-time Foreigner tracks, Hot Blooded is the one for me. Unbelievable track that needs to be included in this discussion tonight. Now, following that up, though, I think I'm going to go a little deeper here. And I'm going to go with a song that if you're listening to the music playlist on Spotify, you're not going to be able to hear it because it is one of those instances where you need to own the physical media. So physical media for the win. You can get it on CD. It's an import, but you can get it on CD. Vinyl is the version that most people have here in the US. No, I'm not talking about Buckingham Nicks because that finally got its long overdue release in the US on vinyl and CD. Thank you for that. Puts my import version now officially out of commission. But using that Buckingham Nicks as a jumping off point, it's a band that I feel like is rooted in the same musical style as Buckingham Nicks and the Fleetwood Mac albums from that era. And I'm going to go with the Tarney Spencer Band, No Time to Lose. While the album came out in 1979, I don't remember that point because I was only a toddler. However, in 1981, when MTV was on a heavy rotation in our house, I remember this music video playing a lot in my early childhood years, which truly speaks to the power and influence that MTV had at that time, because this was a 2-year-old song. This song actually hit the Billboard Hot 100 back in 1979, and through the music video's exposure on MTV, re-entered the Billboard Hot 100 charts and charted even higher. It wasn't a top 40 hit. It only hit number 74, which means this is not one of those songs that might even be a household name. You might be saying, Tarney Spencer, what? Yeah, this is not a household band name, but it's one that in my house was a household name. The album it came from is called Run for Your Life. If you haven't heard this album, I highly suggest looking it up. You're not going to find it on iTunes. You're not going to find it on Spotify, Apple Music. It's out there on YouTube, but you can go on Discogs and find a vinyl version or a CD version from overseas. Highly suggest giving this album a listen, especially if you're into that Buckingham Nicks Fleetwood Mac sound. This song has such a gallop in the chorus. It just puts a smile on my face. Fantastic vocal harmonies, something that my father really resonated with, and I think that's why I resonate with it as well. He played a lot of songs that leaned in on multi-part vocal harmonies, and this is definitely one that does that. So if you don't know No Time to Lose by the Tarney Spencer Band, make it a part of your day to head over to the episode page at myweeklymixtape.com. I'll be sure to even embed the video version there so you could see the video that I saw on constant rotation as a youngin'. But with that, we are 9 songs into side A of the songs that shaped my musical world. And with that, I'm going to close up with a cover song. You know I love my covers, and that's something I got from my father because one of the albums he loved to play when I was growing up a lot was David Johansen's Live It Up or Live It Up, depending on how you want to pronounce it, as it was, a live album. And that album, another album opener, was an Animals medley. And that consisted of We Gotta Get Out of This Place, Don't Bring Me Down, and It's My Life. Now, I talked about the kind of proto-punk that Question Mark and the Mysterians brought with 96 Tears. This was David Johansen of the New York Dolls doing his solo thing before he went to Buster Poindexter. This is raw. This is heavy. This is that punk rock spirit, taking that sound of the Animals and amping it up a little bit. David Johansen's voice is just perfect for what Eric Burdon did with the Animals. It was my introduction to the Animals. I didn't even realize that these 3 songs weren't one song until much later when CDs came into play and my dad went out and bought the best of the Animals. And I'm like, oh, those aren't one song? Like, you don't know these things as a kid. There was no internet to look it up. I didn't realize. I just assumed We Got to Get Out of This Place segued right into Don't Bring Me Down and segued right into It's My Life. That was just the way it was done. So I fell in love with all 3 songs and then the Animals as a band because of this. The reason I'm closing out side A with this song is because this one was very important to my father, and I didn't learn about it until much later in life. When I was in college, I had a very long commute from New Jersey down to North Carolina where I went to school, and sometimes my father would drive down with me and then take a flight home. And we would have a lot of conversations, listen to a lot of music, and just talk for 10 straight hours. And we were listening to that Animals Greatest Hits album, and We Got to Get Out of This Place was playing. And he said, we listened to this song a lot when you were a kid growing up. I said, yeah. He goes, there's a reason I love this song. And I'm curious, do you know what that is? And I said, because it's awesome? And he goes, yeah, of course. But this was, for him and the people he served with in Vietnam, one of the songs that helped them get through the tough days. This was the song that hyped them up, that got them hopeful for a future where they can return home. And this was their anthem. And I didn't know that for the first 17 years of my life. And when I look back at it now and I listen to this song again, and I scroll through old photo albums of my father from Vietnam, and I hear this song playing, I could just see why it meant so much to them and the power and the impact that it had on those serving. The song is rightfully inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. And at my father's services, I talked with a lot of the people he served with that showed up. And I brought this song up and they all said, yeah, this is one that really meant a lot to all of us. And with that, this song will now always hold an even more special place in my heart beyond the Friday night music nights, because thinking about my childhood now, when we were rocking out to that song, not only was he enjoying the music, he was expressing his gratefulness that he was able to sing that song outside of a war zone and back at home with his family and his child. And it weighs so heavily on me now when I think about that. And it's profound. And it's a perfect way to close out this first side, which kicked off with No Shock to Anybody, the Cars' Good Times Roll, followed up by Prince's Let's Go Crazy, Pat Benatar's Promises in the Dark, ZZ Top's Sharp Dressed Man, Huey Lewis in the News, The Heart of Rock and Roll, Johnny Rivers' Rockin' Pneumonia and the Boogie Woogie Flu, Question Mark and the Mysterians' 96 Tears, Foreigner's Hot Blooded, the Tarney Spencer Band's No Time to Lose, and David Johansen's Animals medley, We Gotta Get Out of This Place, Don't Bring Me Down, and It's My Life. If you want to hear all the songs I've discussed in this playlist, head over to the episode page where all of these songs are embedded at myweeklymixtape.com. And now we're flipping the proverbial mixtape over and starting side B of this playlist dedicated to songs that shaped my love of music, dedicated to my father. We are going to start with a side opening track, not an album opening track. However, this one comes with a little bit of a funny story, at least an embarrassing story on my part, but I'm willing to be vulnerable for all the My Weekly Mixtape listeners and open up about some of my not finest moments. And I'll start this by saying it wasn't until I got my first CD copy of Heart's Bebe Lestrange that I realized that Even It Up wasn't the album opener. This was the song that started side B on the vinyl record. However, it was the song my father always played on Friday night music nights. So for the first at least decade of my life, I thought Even It Up was the Bebe Lestrange album opening track. And when I got the CD and I put it in, for the first few seconds, I'm like, the hell is wrong with this CD? And then I flipped over that jewel case to read through that track listing. Oh. And even then, with it right in front of my face, I thought maybe they screwed up the track listing on this CD. So yeah, Even It Up by Heart, kicking off side B. A little bit of an embarrassing moment on my part, but not one that I'm too ashamed about, because Even It Up is such a killer song. And synergistically now, I get to start side B of this playlist / mixtape with it, where it's in its rightful spot. I could have went with any Heart song, honestly. One of the last concerts my father and I got to go see together was Ann Wilson's solo. Unfortunately, she did not do Even It Up. She did a lot of cover songs and a few Heart songs sprinkled in, but it was still Ann Wilson, and she is still one of, if not the greatest female rock singer of all time, in my humble opinion. She has to be in the conversation. She has done so much for women in rock music that I think it's hard to not justify her to be in a top spot, whether it's not the top one, because I've had arguments with people where they'll chime in with Aretha Franklin, and I know that's soul and R&B, but yeah, Aretha Franklin rocks as well, and she could certainly be in the top of the mountain when it comes to rock music and female vocalists. But Ann Wilson is right there as well. Her voice just does something to this day that, man, I don't know. Every time I hear a cover of it, I'm like, that's good. That's really good, because I've heard Lizzie Hale, who I think carries a torch for modern hard rock female singers, and I heard her do a Heart cover, and I said, that's good, but it's not Ann Wilson good. And I love Lizzie, and I'm in zero disrespect. I love her voice, but it's not Ann Wilson. When I saw Carrie Underwood do Alone on American Idol and everyone was losing their mind, I'm like, that's good. That's really good. But it's not Ann Wilson. And Even It Up is one of those songs that, yes, it's not the first song you think of when you think about Heart's classics, but in my mind, it is a classic Heart tune. There's some underrated Heart hits, and Even It Up is at the top of those charts for me. A lot of people go to Magic Man, Crazy on You, Alone, Barracuda. The list goes on and on and on. So I feel like songs such as Even It Up, Heartless, even something as big as a top 20 hit like Straight On, they just kind of get lost in this immense catalog of fantastic music from Heart. So kicking off side B, Even It Up from Heart. If you haven't heard that album, go back and listen to it. If you have the vinyl of Bebe Lestrange, you have to start it on side B to get the full Brian Colburn effect with that one. And to follow that up, I think I'm going to go with a track 2 on a side B of an album that we used to listen to all the time. And once again, similar to Heart's Bebe Lestrange, I thought for the first several years of my life that Beat It kicked off Michael Jackson's Thriller. Now, that's not the song we're going with, although I very easily could. Beat It was a huge part of Friday night music nights. But once again, I'm going to embarrass myself, my childhood self, for your listening pleasure. And you can either laugh with me or at me. I'm good either way. But the song that followed up, Beat It on Thriller, was Billie Jean. And I was young when this song came out. And my parents never let me forget this one. One of the Friday night music nights when it got to my music pick, I asked if they can put on A Pair of Jeans Is Not My Lover. My father never let me forget that until his last day. He always referred to it as a pair of jeans. That being said, being a bass player, my love of the bass guitar, in some significant way, shape, or form, came from this song. That opening bass line had such a groove and such a swagger that I didn't even know what the definition of those words were as a kid, but I knew I was feeling it. And it made me realize that a song can revolve around the bass guitar, which made me love the instrument. And the song just rocks. I know a lot of people talk about Beat It being, the big rock song on the album, Eddie Van Halen with the uncredited guitar solo, but everything about Thriller rocks as an album, and Billie Jean is definitely one of those tracks. And then there's that music video. Once again, MTV playing a huge role in some of the songs that shaped my love of music, because that video just blew my mind. I mean, everything that was released from the Thriller album was incredible. The Beat It video, Weird Al, Eat It. I mean, you have to acknowledge it there. Billie Jean, and then let's not get into Thriller because I'll probably have nightmares if I bring that video up now. I mean, I don't know if you were a child of the 80s and you stayed up and watched Thriller the night it premiered. I don't know how many children slept that night. Like, that video was just something else. An absolute masterpiece of epic proportions. Let's face it, it's a movie quality music video that to this day, every Halloween, I make sure the kids watch it so I could scar them for life the way I was. It's just one of those things. The dance routine is so iconic, but we're not talking about Thriller. I'm sidetracking here. I apologize. Even in Billie Jean, you got the moonwalk. And I'll admit, as a kid, I did my best attempts at a moonwalk. I wouldn't say it was very good, but my parents gave me an A for effort, and for now, that's good enough for me. So following up Hearts Even It Up, which was the first track on side B of Bebe Lestrange, is the second track on side B of Michael Jackson's Thriller, and the second track on side B of this mixtape, Billie Jean. Now, I wish I could say I was going to be creative enough to continue down this side B track number path, but I'm not. We're going to pivot a little bit and go to a side A song. It's not an album opener, so I'll give each of you a moment to collectively get over the shock you're feeling right now. And we're going to move on to another artist that was a big part of Friday night music nights for my family. This was definitely one that fell under the mom selection category, although there was nothing but love for this artist from both my father and myself. So anything she chose by him would work in this spot. And that would be the one and only Billy Joel. Talked about him many a times on my weekly mixtape and had the honor of having Liberty DeVito, drummer for the Billy Joel Band, on the show to create the ultimate Billy Joel playlist way back early in season 1. If you haven't heard that episode, I highly recommend checking it out because Liberty tells some incredible Billy Joel stories, and you hear some stuff about the hits as well as some of the deeper cuts that you might not expect. So if you're a big Billy Joel fan, you don't want to miss that one. Now, I could have went with pretty much anything from The Stranger through The Bridge as my song choice because those were the albums that were collectively played in endless rotation in my house. However, I'm going to go with one because I found a video shortly after my father passed, and it was him and I at a friend's house doing karaoke. And it reminded me of Friday night music nights because we used to sing this song together when I was a child, and then we did it as karaoke as adults. And that would be the call and answer of It's Still Rock and Roll to Me from Glass Houses. He would always sing the first line, and I would reply with the second line. And we did that as adults. And it's something that, because this playlist is dedicated to him, I feel like this is the song to use for this playlist. But any Billy Joel song could fit in this instance. This is definitely another one of those Huey Lewis, Pat Benatar moments that I could have went with an endless string of songs and any one of them would work. So taking up the number 3 slot is Billy Joel's It's Still Rock and Roll to Me. Next up's a song that I would have chosen on a Friday night music night. This one we had on 45. I know we've talked about nothing but full-length albums, but make no mistake, there was also a box filled with 45s, and this was one of the first ones I always picked out, and that would be the Jay Giles Band's Centerfold. Now, given my age at the time, thankfully the lyrics went right over my head. I just loved the song. I loved singing along with it. I loved the na parts. I just loved everything about the groove and the vibe and energy of the song. So much so that when we were in Hershey Park for the first time, they had one of those sing your own song karaoke booths. And I have a recording of myself in, I want to say, 2nd grade, maybe 3rd grade, singing Centerfold by the Jay Giles Band. Now, you see, I'm throwing all these embarrassing moments about myself out at this part of the episode because if you're still listening now, we're friends here, and I feel like I could tell you this stuff without fear of getting shredded on all the My Weekly Mixtape social accounts, which I'm actually going to use this time to not give them out just in case you want to shred me. But yes, second or third grade Brian belting out Jay Giles Band's Centerfold, and I did a pretty damn good job of it, I'm not going to lie. And listening back to it, now that the lyrics make sense, and no, I will never play it on the show. I don't care how much you guys offer. It ain't happening. Although I do have a copy of me singing the Ghostbusters theme in first grade, I want to say, or maybe it was second grade for Ghostbusters, third grade for Centerfold. Regardless, elementary school. We'll just leave it at that. And that one still puts a smile on my face because I was singing Ghostbusters as if I was trying to scare the ghosts away. And Ghostbusters is another one that easily could have made this playlist, but spoiler alert, there's just not enough songs to get to it tonight. But Jay Giles Band's Centerfold, Peter Wolf, I mean, what an incredible artist. Come As You Are is one of my favorite Peter Wolf songs from the 80s. Centerfold has that same vibe. The Freeze Frame album is so much fun. This was a party song. This was also something that MTV subjected me to. And towards the end of the video, when he hits that snare roll on the snare drum and it's either paint or milk or God knows what it is, and maybe I don't want to know, that image is ingrained in my mind. I saw these videos and heard these songs over and over and over again. So if they warp my mind a little bit, so be it. But this is a great song, and I'll stand by it, and it definitely shaped my love for fun, party rock music. Thank you, Jay Giles Band. And I wasn't kidding when I said at the beginning of this episode that there would not be any ballads on this. My dad did not go for ballads very often. If anything, maybe the closest thing to a ballad that he would have thrown onto one of these mixtapes or Friday night music nights was Drive from the Cars when Heartbeat City was in a constant rotation. And there was a couple of others, maybe one or two. And there's one that I know I'm going to talk about later on, even though it's not going to make the mix. So I'll put a pin in that for now. However, this next one is definitely not a ballad, and it's definitely a divisive song. And for the first time tonight, it was a song that we did not have on vinyl LP. My father actually had the cassette of this album. So that added a completely different layer to Friday Night Music Night because he would have to switch inputs on the player just to pop his cassette in of Kilroy Was Here, so we can hear the opening to Mr. Roboto from Styx. And once again, if you see how a lot of these interviews I've done on this show kind of play into what I'm talking about tonight, I had Lawrence Gowan from Styx on the podcast, and we talked all things Styx, even though he was not originally on the Kilroy Was Here album. That was Dennis DeYoung. We talk about how Mr. Roboto made its way back into Styx set list over the years, and one of the last concerts my parents got to go see together was Styx. And when they called me on the way home from the show, one of the first things he said to me when I answered the phone was, "Hey Brian, guess what? We got to see Mr. Roboto towards the end of the set." So yes, Mr. Roboto is going in this mix. I mean, as a kid who grew up with the Transformers, Mr. Roboto, I know it's a divisive Styx song, but I love this song. And as a kid, it was futuristic. I watched Star Wars and was into Transformers. This felt like a song that was geared towards my mind at the time. I love this song. And listening back musically, it's such a fun and dynamic listen. Put headphones on and listen into the opening to this song. Between the way the synthesizers are incorporated into the opening and the panning of the music back and forth, they really did a fantastic job painting a visual picture through the music on Mr. Roboto. And yes, I understand this is not the Styx that was in the 70s and there was all the problems that went on with this tour and everything else. Hindsight is 2020. There's nothing wrong with Mr. Roboto, and it has a place in this playlist tonight, and I will defend it until the end of time. But after that, we're going to go dig back into that box of 45s. And this is one of those instances where I knew a song so well by the 45 version. The first time I heard the album cut, my mind was blown because it was several minutes longer. And that album was Time Exposure. And that band, the Little River Band. And the song, The Night Owls. Now, my dad was not a big yacht rock person. I don't even know back then if it was referred to as yacht rock. He loved the Doobie Brothers, but it definitely was not the Michael McDonald era. It was the long train running, rocking down the highway, China Grove era of the Doobie Brothers. However, the Night Owls was a different beast for the Little River Band, at least in terms of my household. I am not talking about the band as a whole here. This song had a swagger to it that fit in with Friday Night Music Nights. And then there's those vocal harmonies. When those vocal harmonies come in at the chorus, oh my God, how can you not want to sing along with it? I know it's not the Little River Band's biggest hit. It did make their greatest hits, but as far as I'm concerned, this song is the pinnacle of the Little River Band, and it's also such a huge part of what I love about harmonies in music. But going back to that album version, the first time I heard the album version, I actually thought it skipped because they cut the intro almost in half before the vocals start. And when it started again, I'm like, what's going on here? And I realized, oh, this is an actual thing here. There are versions that you get on the 45, the radio edits, and then there's the album version. And this is the first time I realized that. So just in my grand musical education, The Night Owls is an important song in my music knowledge. Then I learned other lessons like I talked about on the 80s hairband episodes, such as the Two Live Crew's Me So Horny, and what a radio version and an album version can truly be like. But that's certainly a song we did not listen to on Friday Night Music Nights, so I digress. Back to the playlist. We talked a lot about vocal harmonies tonight. We talked a lot about rockin' songs. But one thing I haven't really talked about yet was my dad's love for guitar. And there were certain guitar solos that always got included on Friday Night Music Nights. The first one, believe it or not, came off of an 8-track. That was a pain in the ass, let me just say. Because to get to this song, sometimes you'd have to hear other songs because you really couldn't forward your way to the next track, at least on the 8-track player we had at the time. However, when that artist is Jimi Hendrix, if you have to listen to Can You See Me or Foxy Lady before you can get to the musical cream filling, if you will, the blues goodness of Red House, I think we're okay. Yeah, that was track 4 on the 8-track tape of Smash Hits. Red House is the song that introduced me to the blues. And my father always said, the blues doesn't get better than this. And I've seen Joe Bonamassa, I've seen Buddy Guy, I've seen B.B. King, and all three are absolutely undeniable in terms of sheer guitar talent. There is no arguing when it comes to that. And to this day, when I hear the guitar solo by Jimi Hendrix in Red House, I still feel like that is the pinnacle of blues music. Now, I know there's other blues purists listening to this that might be getting angry at that. But again, music is all subjective opinion. It's how it hits it, how it resonates. And without Red House, I would not love the blues. And seeing my father playing air guitar to it every single time he heard it, we could be in his van driving and he would start playing air guitar. And I'm still able to sit here and talk to you. Thankfully, he was a good enough driver that he was able to pull off the Jimi Hendrix air guitar and drive and keep us in the lane at the same time. That was a skill set. And I'm very proud of him for that and grateful because I'm still here to be able to talk about it. But when I talk about guitar solos blowing my mind, Red House is one of the first ones that ever did. And I'm going to follow that up with the first guitar solo that ever blew my mind and embarrass myself one last time on tonight's episode. I'm grateful for this next song because it taught me patience in music. Over the years, my father would always play songs that were 3-4 minutes, when you're making a mixtape, but he would also include the longer songs. Meatloaf's Paradise by the Dashboard Light, Iron Butterflies, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, The Doors, The End, or When the Music's Over. Songs that were 8, 10, even 17 minutes long in terms of In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. But one of the first ones that I ever remember falling in love with was from Frampton Comes Alive. That being, Do You Feel Like I Do? And as a child, I'll embarrass myself once again, I honestly thought Peter Frampton owned a talking guitar. I'll wait for you to finish laughing. But as a kid, sitting there in front of the speakers listening to this, hearing the crowd cheer when the guitar started talking, I would turn to my folks and say, he has a talking guitar? My dad said, well, it's magic. I didn't see any videos of it. So I assumed Peter Frampton kind of waved a magic wand and the friggin' guitar stood up and walked over to the microphone and started singing. That was my 5, 6, 7-year-old imagination at play. And as a side note, wouldn't it be great if as adults we can continue to have the imagination we had as kids and not get blasted for it the way society does now? Because every time I hear this song, it always makes me smile because in the back of my mind, I'm still that 5-year-old sitting in front of the speaker with his legs crossed, staring at the speaker, wondering how that guitar got up off the stand and started talking to the audience. And this is guitar work that blew my mind. And it made me fall in love with the guitar. And I'm so grateful for that. But we're coming to the end here of side B, and there's 2 songs left. And I think like the first song on side A, now I'm not going to shock people, at least for these last 2. The first one I'm going to choose is by my favorite artist of all time, Tom Petty. Now, I've talked about on this show before that I was introduced to Tom Petty via my father through the Chipmunk Punk album, because there is a cover of Refugee by Alvin and the Chipmunks. And every now and then I would say, hey, Dad, can we put on Alvin and the Chipmunks on Friday Night Music Night? And sure. And we'd put on Refugee. And I remember one random Friday night, he said, hey, Brian, did you know that another band does Refugee besides Alvin and the Chipmunks? And I said, I do not. And that's when he broke out Damn the Torpedoes and played me Tom Petty for the first time. Now, while that would normally seem like that would be the ideal song to put in this place, I actually have another one I'm going to use. Because Friday Night Music Night stretched well into the 80s. Although over time, it became, with dual cassette players and CDs, a lot less vinyl heavy. Even though we still went to the old vinyl records, more cassettes came into play, especially as I became part of the cassette culture of the 80s, and then CDs. But one of the last albums on vinyl I remember my father buying. He came home with the big vinyl bag. And I'm like, what'd you get? And he goes, sometimes there's albums you just need to have on vinyl. And I heard this song today and I had to stop at the record store on the way home and grab it. And this is definitely a must-have on vinyl album. And he pulled out his copy of Full Moon Fever, which I still have framed on my wall in my family room. And if I remember, I will post a picture of that on this episode page. And the song that he bought it for is the song I'm going to follow up Peter Frampton's Do You Feel Like I Do with. And that is Tom Petty's Running Down a Dream. Now, I've talked about on some of the oldies episodes that my father was a huge classic car guy. He rebuilt a 66 GTO and a 68 Camaro, both of which were convertibles. And when he brought home that Full Moon Fever album and played Running Down a Dream, he said, is there any song that's more suited to put the top down and go for a cruise to? So there's your answer. And it also, the album blew my mind because when he dropped the needle and I heard Free Fallin' for the first time, I was like, wow, this album opens with a ballad. That's interesting. And Free Fallin' was one of those few ballads that would get into play, just like I mentioned earlier with The Cars Drive. There weren't many, but when they came out, they were impactful. But Tom Petty's Running Down a Dream was one of the last vinyl records I ever remember my father buying. And then he switched to CDs when CDs became all the rage. And time moved on through the decades. So I felt like that was the perfect song to put in the penultimate track on this 20-song Friday Night Music playlist, the songs that made me fall in love with music. But the last one is very special to me. It's one of my favorite bands of all time. It's one of my father's favorite bands of all time. It's a band that we didn't get to see together until 2015, which I'm just trying to wrap my mind around the fact that that's already a decade ago. And I'm so glad we got that chance. And the cover of this episode might be the photo from him and I at this concert. My cousins were huge into music too, and sometimes they would come over on Friday night music night and bring some of their albums. And when they did, it was usually pretty much a stack of Cheap Trick, Def Leppard, Journey, and AC/DC. And closing out tonight is the song that AC/DC used to close out the concert we saw together in 2015, because seeing the look on my father's face during the 21 gun salute in For Those About to Rock, We Salute You, is a look I will never, ever forget. This song is everything I love about hard rock music. From the opening line, "Stand up and be counted for what you are about to receive," to the closing guitar solo. Normally you see people trying to leave concerts early, get to the car, get out as quickly as possible. There was no way on God's green earth we were missing the end of For Those About to Rock, We Salute You. And as those cannons were firing, my father actually made the salute like in the army, and then turned to me and said, "This is one of the greatest fucking things I've ever seen in my life." So there's no better way to close out this playlist about the songs that made me fall in love with music than AC/DC's For Those About to Rock, We Salute You. And as this episode is dedicated to my father, I salute him in gratefulness and thankfulness for sharing these 20 songs with me and shaping my love of music that I still have to this day and will carry with me every day until the day that my time comes. But with that being said, side B kicked off with Hearts, Even It Up, followed up by Michael Jackson's Billie Jean, or A Pair of Jeans, Billy Joel's It's Still Rock and Roll to Me, the Jay Giles Band Centerfold, Styx' Mr. Roboto, the Little River Band's The Night Owls, Jimi Hendrix's Red House, Peter Frampton's Do You Feel Like I Do, Tom Petty's Running Down a Dream, and AC/DC For Those About to Rock, We Salute You. And just as a reminder, you can hear all 20 of the songs I've talked about tonight over on the episode page at myweeklymixtape.com. For those of you who have made it this far into the episode, I want to thank you. I know this is not a traditional My Weekly Mixtape episode. This is a topic that I am sure people are not seeking out when they're looking for podcasts, but this was a very important episode for me to do, and this week was the week that I felt like it needed to air. You could say that Thanksgiving this year is going to be a little tough for my family, and that is true, because there is going to be an empty seat at the table this year. However, there's also a reason to give thanks and to be grateful. Because for 47 years, my father made such a huge impact on my life through many other ways besides music. But this is a music podcast, so I wanted to use this episode to celebrate him through the songs that helped shape who I am as a person, as a musician, and as a podcaster. So I am grateful and thankful for that. And I am also grateful and thankful to each and every one of you who listen to this show week in and week out, who support the show, who are part of the musical conversation on social media with me, who send me messages and emails after episodes with how you would have done things a little differently. I read every one that comes in. I try my best to respond. And if I don't, please don't ever take offense. At the end of the day, I'm still a father. I'm still a husband. I'm still a family man. And this is not my full-time gig. If it was, I would be responding to every single email that came through. But this is a labor of love for me and something I'm extremely passionate about doing. Hell, I just talked for over an hour about 20 songs that shaped my love of music. So the fact that you're still listening now, I am sincerely grateful. So there's a lot of reason to give thanks this week. And if there are songs out there that you listen to that your parents, doesn't have to just be your father, that your parents shared with you and you're able to sit down with them at Thanksgiving, thank them for that. Thank them for the music. Thank them for everything. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday. Enjoy the time with the family. Cherish it, embrace it, and be sure to talk music at it, because it's certainly better than talking politics and religion. And I will leave you with that. If you have a topic for a future My Weekly Mixtape episode that you would like to hear me cover, send me an email, myweeklymixtape@gmail.com. Hit me up on all the social media haunts at My Weekly Mixtape, or join the Mixtaper community over at patreon.com/My Weekly Mixtape. You could do so for free. And there's also several tiers if you want to contribute to the show. It helps me keep the cost of running this show week in and week out down. I'm extremely grateful for that. And finally, you can hear all the songs I talked about in tonight's episode, as well as check out the full catalog of My Weekly Mixtape episodes over at myweeklymixtape.com. My name is Brian Colburn. This has been My Weekly Mixtape, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen to the 20 songs that shaped my love of music, thanks to my father. Now be sure to go check out the tunes, because obviously you know how I feel about them. I hope you feel the same, and I will see you next week, same time, same place. Take care.